I'm really nervous for this scene though. That was a nice thing to say, Navia. Oh yeah, this scene is gonna piss me off, isn't it? No, you cannot hear. You cannot listen to somebody's words and then dictate whether or not there is emotion behind them. It's rude and it's incorrect, and to a degree it's inherently ableist to say there's no emotion behind your words. I can hear it. You're not being sincere because you're not saying things how I think you should say them. Saying the things that she's saying is a line that you cannot cross and still be sympathetic. It's extremely disrespectful, and it's an extremely horrible thing to say, and it's not a thing that should be perpetuated, that you can indeed tell somebody that they're being insincere because there's no emotion behind their words. There are so many reasons as to why a person who is being completely sincere may not sound like there's any emotion coming from their words. It does not mean that they don't mean it. It's perfectly fine. Some people cannot express things. Some people have difficulty for various reasons when it comes to expressing things, and we are not going to judge people or look down on people for not expressing feelings the way that you would express them. Oh, I'm actually getting agitated. You know, I don't think that was a sincere apology, because that didn't sound exactly how I would make an apology for the same thing, and therefore there's no emotion behind her words. Oh, that enraged me more than I thought it was gonna. Oh, I'm genuinely enraged. Yeah, you made that happen, Navia. Feel guilty.
So, I may have gotten a little bit upset during my playthrough. Yeah, I'm really nervous about making a video like this, since the Genshin fandom is much bigger and much more vocal than the Kamen Rider fandom. I feel a lot safer venting about how mean Izu was that one time, or how unsympathetic Aruto is. I'll watch an episode, I'll see people online talking about how lovely Aruto is, I'll think, where is he being nice? Point it out to me! And then make an hour-long video defending Horobi and calling Aruto out as the arrogant, self-centered spokesperson of slave labour that he is. And then I'll vent to a friend who I swear is the only other person in the world who watched the version I did, rather than whatever strange edit everyone else in the world clearly watched, because that's the only explanation I can possibly think of. I mean, I know people have different opinions and stuff, but there's something so odd about watching Aruto talking to a traumatized 5-year-old about how it's such a shame he was raised in such a dangerous environment before killing him, and then seeing the internet gush about how compassionate Aruto is. Yeah, the way he witnesses a humour gear shut down and fall to the floor from overworking, and then proceeds to obsess over how sad he is that the mangaka he's a fan of is kind of disappointing, instead of the blatant mistreatment of the guy's forced labourers, is so compassionate. The way he actively verbally states that it's like slavery, and then proceeds to be totally fine with it and advocates for it, is so compassionate. Yeah, I was wrong, the guy is a sweetheart. Anyway, this is not about 01. Stop it. The point is, I'm in a weird YouTube space right now where I'd love to get more traction and make something of this, but I also only want my friends to watch these videos and nobody else. I'll make a video saying Aruto is mean and Horobi is hacked by the Ark, and my friend will say yeah, and I'll say exactly, and that's it. I mean, who else is going to find those videos, you know? But my video about Risley, where people speculated he was blind, and then others were disgustingly ableist about it, was seen by way more people than I felt comfortable with. So, all of that to say, I'm nervous to make a video about Genshin like this, especially since I know this is an unpopular opinion, but I have to. Though the difference between my issues with Navia and my issues with Aruto is that I do at least understand where the other side, I suppose, are coming from when they say they actually liked this scene between her and Noviette. I understand at least why people would like her in that scene and why people wouldn't have the issues that I do. People thinking Aruto is compassionate will forever be an enigma to me, but I do understand Navia to a degree, and I don't dislike her, I really don't. Anyway, have I rambled enough about 01 to turn people away? Am I safe to vent? Because I'm gonna. Anyway, welcome to my new series, and you know what else, in which I just unapologetically rant about something that's bothering me. Expect these videos to be completely unhinged and nonsensical at times, just so you know what you're getting yourself into. I can't warn you any more than that.
Miss Navia, I can understand how you feel. Your father, Callus, was a truly exceptional man. We deeply regret his passing.
And what are you trying to say, Monsieur Neuvillette? Are you trying to console me? Extend your sympathy? Or just express some tendril of regret? No. You are not trying to do any of that. I can hear it in your voice. There's no emotion behind your words. You only said those things because you felt like you should.
So before I start, I just want to say I'm not dismissing Navia's right to be angry. Her feelings are perfectly valid at the moment. She holds Neuvillette at least partially to blame for what happened, and whether that's right or wrong of her isn't the point. She's angry, she's allowed to be. But no one in the scene is dismissing her emotions, so I'm not going to make a point of defending them like I will Neuvillette. That doesn't mean I don't think her feelings are valid. They are. Feelings are valid in general. But because no one is saying they aren't, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Whereas she is dismissing Neuvillette's emotions, so that's where my focus is. I'm not saying he's right and she's wrong, but she was allowed to say what she said and express herself in the way she did without consequence, and he was not, which is why I'm focusing on defending him and not her. Because there doesn't have to be a right and a wrong. They can both be right, they can both be wrong, they can both be somewhere in the middle. But she said a lot that needs criticising, and he didn't, and that's just where we are. I'm not saying she wasn't allowed to be angry, and I'm not saying she wasn't allowed to express that. Or I'd be a massive hypocrite, but she could have expressed her feelings without saying what she said. And I don't like the idea of that sentiment being left unchecked. I don't like the idea of players coming away from this interaction thinking it's okay to dismiss the way someone expresses themselves, because it's different from the way you would express yourselves, or it's different from the social norm, and therefore it's insincere.
Miss Navia, I can understand how you feel. Your father, Callus, was a truly exceptional man. We deeply regret his passing.
I'm also at a disadvantage when it comes to dissecting a Genshin scene, because when I do this with Kamen Rider, I prefer to talk about the overall meaning of what was said rather than the specific words, given how much can be lost in translation. Though I will talk about a specific meaning of a specific Japanese word if it's relevant and I'm confident enough. But I can't do that to the same degree with Genshin, because while Kamen Rider doesn't get officially translated, and I am watching the original Japanese, which gives me more freedom, Genshin does get officially translated into English, and I don't know Chinese, so I can only go by what has been translated. So I can't really talk as much about how I wish something had been written instead, because I don't know how the English compares to the Chinese. Basically what I'm trying to say is, I want to say I wish that if she absolutely had to have a go, she'd have spoken more about the words Neuvillette said, rather than the way he said them. Instead of going off at him about not sounding sincere to her, she'd have instead said something about regretting his passing. I mean, it's not an issue I personally have. I understand what he's saying, but Navia taking issue with the word regret being impersonal, I suppose, would have been much less insulting than going after his self-expression. But I don't know how the original Chinese reads. Maybe it's less insulting, maybe it's just the same, maybe it's worse, I have no idea. I just wanted to acknowledge the limitations I have compared to how I might usually go about things. But I wouldn't have minded if that's how the scene went instead. He said, "We regret his passing," and Navia goes off and the whole thing like, regret? Is that all you have to say? Don't you feel XYZ? Don't you feel blah blah blah? And then maybe that could have shown the different ways these two communicate and express their emotions. How Navia is much more in touch with her emotions, isn't afraid to be seen to be upset or vulnerable. Perhaps she could represent emotions as being strength, whereas Neuvillette is much more reserved and doesn't have the luxury to be able to be seen as emotional, or maybe his emotions have diminished due to him having lived a long time and witnessed so many awful things because he's totally the Hydro Dragon. We all know it, they aren't trying to be subtle about it. Maybe we also could have had a thing where they both are kind of like at two extremes. Navia is perhaps too emotional and lets her emotions get in the way of things and she needs to not, whereas Neuvillette needs to let his emotions actually come through a little bit and not hide from them as much. Maybe they could sort of learn to meet in the middle. I don't know. I'm tempted to bring up emotional blunting, which is where you struggle to emote, I suppose. Like, it's difficult for you to express how you're feeling, or you may not act like it might be expected of you to act in relation to how you're feeling. Like, you might be sad, but you might not look sad, or you might be happy, but you might not look happy, and then you might get a bunch of people being like, you're right, even though you're actually absolutely thrilled to be there, but people think it's more than a resting bitch face. People will look at you and think, oh my god, are you okay? You look really sad, but you're really not. I'm not projecting, I promise. But he has an air about him that reminds me of that kind of thing, which is very often linked to things like depression, which is, again, why we shouldn't diminish how people express themselves and why we should believe that they do feel how they say they feel, because you have no idea why they not be expressing themselves the way that you think they should. Because even if you're not acting the way that people think you should act, that doesn't mean you aren't. Can I not? eBay, can you not tell me a thing while I'm trying to have a serious conversation? It doesn't mean you're not feeling it, is what I'm trying to say. We could go into a very nice story about respecting the different ways in which people express themselves, and if you really care about someone, then it really isn't all that hard most of the time to learn how they do express themselves. A passerby might look at Novilet and say, oh yeah, he's fine, because they're comparing him to how they'd expect emotional responses to look. But if you knew it rained when he cried, and you saw it raining, then you'd realise just how expressive he actually is. God, please actually be the Hydra Dragon after all of this. It'll be so embarrassing if he isn't. She could perhaps also have taken issue with the phrasing, we regret his passing, like, not you personally, just we, who's we. She could have said something about that. Noviet is trying to distance himself because, like I said, he doesn't have the luxury to be emotional, and Navia notices this, but she doesn't understand the reasoning behind his distance and instead is insulted by it. That's the route we could have gone. But unfortunately, that's not how the scene went. Instead, we got this.
And what are you trying to say, Monsieur Novilet? Are you trying to console me? Extend your sympathy? Or just express some tendril of regret? No, you are not trying to do any of that. I can hear it in your voice. There's no emotion behind your words. You only said those things because you felt like you should.
Objection, unsubstantiated. Very well, you may state your case, and please, for the love of, well, me, do make it interesting. My client stands accused of being insincere in his statements towards Miss Navia regarding his feelings of regret towards the prosecution's father's passing. However, I would like to argue that that is blatantly untrue. First of all, Miss Navia was in the process of leaving when my client decided to speak. Given that the prosecution had approached my client asking for a favour, and my client had fulfilled his agreements to search for some files, the interaction had come to a natural close. Furthermore, as it was Miss Navia who had approached Monsieur Novilet for something, my client had no reason to try and prevent the prosecution from leaving in that moment. He had nothing to gain, and there was no cause for damage control, leading me to the only natural conclusion that the only reason my client would have had a reason to speak in the first place, and not simply let Miss Navia leave, is because he sensed she was upset and he wished to try and ease her discomfort. An attempt was made because he understood and acknowledged that an attempt should be made. But that would align with the prosecution's claim that the defendant did only speak because he felt he had to, would it not? I suppose it could. But why did it have to be said? There would have been no consequences had he remained silent. So I ask, why does it matter that he said what he said because he felt he should? Is that not how the majority of conversations go? Is the feeling that you should say something not often the main driving force for saying it? If somebody holds a door open for you, do you not say thank you because you know that you should? Does that make your appreciation insincere? And when that person responds with, you're welcome, is that also insincere because that is what should follow a thank you? Saying something because you think you should does not make your words insincere. In conclusion, the prosecution's claim that my client only offered words of comfort because he thought he should, and not through any desire to genuinely console her, or offer sympathy, or even express genuine regret, is entirely unsubstantiated. Second of all, I would like to address the claim that the prosecution could, and I quote, hear it in Monsieur Novilet's voice, and that there was no emotion behind Monsieur Novilet's words, backing up the claim that his words were insincere. To that I ask, is that possible? Let me begin by describing apathy. You may be described as apathetic if you lack motivation, feel no or extremely subdued emotions in regards to a positive or negative stimuli, or do not care about your own problems or the issues surrounding you. Can we truly say that this description matches Monsieur Noviette? I don't think we can. If he did not care, then why would he think anything should be said in the first place? Furthermore, it is no surprise to any of us here in Fontaine that my client, Monsieur Noviette, is not human. Therefore, why should he be held to the same emotional expectations as humans? Is it not unfair to expect him to learn to express himself in the one specific way expected of humans, while making no attempt to understand the way he already expresses himself? My closing statement is this. You may assume Monsieur Noviette is apathetic, but you know what they say about assumptions. Also, I'd like to counter-sue for crimes against my own sodding emotional state. And so on and so forth, you get it. Like I said, I'm not defending Navia's right to be upset because no one is saying she can't be. If someone had said a similar thing to her, then I'd be defending her right to be upset too, but since the scene seemed very one-sided to me, that's why I'm more going at her. Though still, even if someone had said a similar thing to her, if her emotional state had been criticised, then I'd still want to talk about what she said specifically. I know this video is all over the place, that's kind of how this series is going to be, but I have two things left to say before I wrap it up. In the real world, there are many reasons as to why someone may present their emotions differently, at least differently compared to what's generally expected. I mentioned emotional blunting already, which can be a symptom of depression, or it could be a trauma response in which you don't feel as strongly as perhaps most people would. Your feelings are somewhat numbed. That doesn't mean you're a bad person who deserves to be berated for not expressing yourself correctly or feeling things correctly, quote unquote correctly. There's also something called the flat effect, where you absolutely do feel the emotions, but they stay inside, they aren't outwardly displayed. This too is often associated with aspects such as PTSD, ADHD, autism, depression, schizophrenia, OCD. You may appear to others as apathetic, but you aren't. There's something called alexithymia, where basically you have a really hard time identifying emotions. It isn't that you can't feel them, but you can't really express how you're feeling to others, and you likely can't recognise how another person is feeling. You might not be able to look at someone and know that they're sad or they're happy or something is bothering them, and if you do know, if they tell you, you're still not gonna know what to do from there. 1 in 10 people are believed to have this, but it's usually associated with neurodivergence, PTSD. It can develop as a trauma response. It's linked with depression and anxiety and chronic pain even. ADHD. I believe it's 1 in 5 autistic people have alexithymia. So what I'm saying is, it is a problem to perpetuate the idea that just because you personally don't think someone is acting in the correct way to be acting if they're supposedly feeling a certain way, since being unable to express yourself emotionally in the way that a neurotypical society has decided is the correct way to do, it is a very real problem that a lot of vulnerable people, neurodivergent people, autistic people, people with depression, anxiety, ADHD, and honestly just a wide variety of medical conditions can and will and do face. And that's why I feel the overwhelming need to defend Noviette's right to express emotion differently. And finally, the second thing, which is the perfect time for work to start being done outside, but we'll ignore that. You can't hear that. Consider him actually being the Hydro Dragon, because, I mean, obviously when he's upset it rains. They are making absolutely no attempt to be subtle about it. He is. I'm gonna feel so upset if actually he isn't, and then this entire thing is a moot point. Well, it isn't. It's still relevant. Okay, stop it. He is because he is the Hydro Dragon, and I refuse to accept the possibility of him not. He is cursed with an uncontrollable proof of his emotional state is what I'm trying to get at. He doesn't get to pretend to be fine if that's what he feels he needs to do, because it's raining. He's not fine. And yeah, well, he's clearly making no attempt to hide the fact he isn't human. People aren't necessarily going to make the connection that he's the Hydra Dragon, so people aren't going to see the rain and know that means Noviette is upset. But that's still such a vulnerable thing to have. Plus, I feel like there's something that could be said by the whole like Hydra Dragon, don't cry thing. Like, do people actually care about the Hydra Dragon, or do they just want it to stop raining, and therefore is he going to feel even more of an inconvenience? I don't know. That would be interesting to delve into. Because, yeah, other people are going to be inconvenienced when he's sad. His emotions are directly impacting others, so I can absolutely see him sort of overcompensating by not allowing himself to outwardly express his emotions. And it's just this whole mess of having absolutely no healthy way to express himself. There's a lot I could say about him. Actually, I'd love to make a full video just about the psychology surrounding Noviette, but I think I'll wait till we finished the main story and potentially his character story quest thing, I hope. I mean, he's a new character and he's going to be on the next banner according to the drip art things, so like, you know, are we going to get... We should, right? Anyway, am I rambling because I'm scared to finish the video because then I'll actually have to post it and oh my god, what if people actually watch it? Maybe. You may say it isn't that deep, but to that I say you might have missed the point. Anyway, yeah, I'm gonna wrap it up now. I'm as surprised as you are that my first video in the series is not about 01, but I am not well enough right now to get that heated. I need to take care of my blood pressure right now. Anyway, if you're still here, why? I'm so sorry. Thank you though. Sydney.